Okay, we'll get started. Welcome everyone to the Dorsey International Franchise Association Franchise Business Network meeting. We have for the first time a webinar connection, and we're fortunate to have a number of participants from really everywhere in the world, Asia, Europe, South America, by webinar, proving that the sun never sets on the Dorsey FBN. I want to introduce just a few people before we introduce the speakers. We're very fortunate to have a number of people who have traveled a long way here in the room also. First, I'd like to introduce Congressman Don, who is in Washington, D.C. now. And thank you, Don, for coming. Pat Parker, where are you, Pat? Pat comes from British Columbia, franchise consultant in British Columbia. Bill Perry is here in Seattle most of the time, but Bill travels a lot to Asia, particularly China, and is an attorney with our office focusing on international trade and manages the blog ChinaTradeWar.com. U.S. China Trade War. U.S. China TradeWar.com. May have some comments later. For webinar participants, we will be saving all the questions to the end. The webinar participant questions will be submitted via the chat feature in the upper left-hand corner of your screen. If you would click on the Show Chat button, then on the bottom left there will be a section to type in your question and send it to the presenter. And we'll try to reserve about 10 minutes at the end for questions, both from the webinar participants and the audience. Our topic is franchising in China and India. I recall when Guangji and I gave a presentation on franchising in China for the ABA annual meeting in Chicago in 2005, almost 10 years ago. China was viewed as a very promising emerging market for international franchising. And wow, what a change in 9 years. It's still a growing market, but it's a well-established and very vibrant market for international franchising. And now India is being viewed as the emerging market in the future, so we'll be able to talk about both. And I'm very privileged now to introduce our speakers. First, closest to me, Sunil Dewan. Sunil has over 20 years' experience successfully building, growing, and managing restaurant, retail, and consumer services franchise chains in the U.S. and international markets. Sunil and I worked together on a master franchise project 20 years ago, a long time ago. Yeah. He has managed business in markets worldwide. He is a frequent speaker at international seminars and is an honorary advisor to the Franchising Association of India. To his left, Michael Fink. Michael is a Senior Vice President, Deputy General Counsel at Starbucks. He has been at Starbucks for 19 years. He currently manages several global teams and since November has sat on the executive leadership team for the Americas business at Starbucks. For the past 7.5 years before that, he built and managed the international legal team with 25 lawyers in 9 countries and was a member of the international business executive team. And to his left, Guangji Zheng. Guangji is an international lawyer at Dorsey with more than 20 years' experience in a wide range of cross-border corporate transactions, including mergers and acquisitions, joint ventures, licensing, and franchising. Guangji has authored books and written articles and speaks frequently on China business matters. I'm going to start out the program by a very brief introduction to international franchising. And this is a topic that I could take hours to cover, and I'll try to do it in 5 to 10 minutes. So listen up and take good notes. The threshold question when a North American company, and I'm going to be talking primarily from the point of view of North American companies, when a North American franchisor wants to expand it internationally, is how to structure it, and specifically whether to expand with company units or franchise units. The pros of company-owned units are stated on the slide. I'm not going to cover these in detail, but basically some of the larger companies, McDonald's, Starbucks, and others, with global brands and with large company operations in the U.S. will choose this route. Michael will be talking more about that later. But for the majority of mid-size franchisors that we represent, the advantages of franchising lead them that direction. There's access to capital of the franchisee, which allows faster expansion, and the shift of the risk and expense of localization, translations, market customization, etc., lead to following the franchise route. There are 5 forms of international franchising that I'll cover, and then some hybrid forms. First, the simplest single-unit franchise. That's typically reserved for countries that are close together and have similar language and customs. For example, U.S. to Canada. When I first started practicing franchise laws when dinosaurs were here, most of the franchising between the U.S. and Canada was master franchising, but now that's not the case. It's evolved. It's mostly one-on-one franchising. Second structure, area development agreement, common in the U.S. as well as internationally. Sunil will talk about that a bit with respect to India. That's a structure where the franchisee is a multiple unit franchisee and is generally given a territory, and in the international context is typically a whole country to develop. Structure number 3, representatives. That's also very common in the U.S. as well as internationally. The area rep acts as an agent to recruit and service, support unit franchisees, but does not sign the unit franchise agreement. And that's in contrast to structure 4, which is sub-franchising, which is really the go-to method for international franchising in markets other than those that are close together. So with sub-franchising, the franchisor enters into a master franchisee contract, becomes a sub-franchisor, and that sub-franchisor enters into the unit franchises. Joint venture is the 5th structure. Joint venture is a hybrid. The franchisor does take an equity interest in the master franchisee. Often it's 50-50, but it could be anything. And that joint venture then becomes the master franchisee and enters into the unit franchise agreement. That requires more participation by the franchisor than a typical franchise relationship. It requires the franchisor to have expertise and to apply capital in the local market. Then there's basically an unlimited number of hybrid structures. You can be very creative. There are test period agreements where development rights conditionally may morph into a master franchise relationship based on performance criteria. There are hybrids of development and master franchise agreements which contain elements of both, not contingent, but set out in advance. There are combined trademark license and master franchise agreements where the franchisor has minimum commitment and minimum revenue. So our other speakers will talk more about China, but just this slide has a very brief review of China franchise law. China has a disclosure, relationship, and registration law. It's very challenging to become a franchisor in China. That's true of international as well as domestic franchisors, but it's not impossible. We've helped a number of clients do that, and many of them very successful. Some of the challenges: everything must be translated and filed with MOFCOM, the Ministry of Commerce, the disclosure documents, contract agreements, underlying entity documents. The franchisor has to prove that it operated at least 2 company units for at least 1 year, which is sometimes a problem for the smaller North American franchises who are pure franchise companies. Master franchisor or sub-franchisor in China has the same requirement, the 2 units for 1 year requirement. The franchisor's trademark must be registered before they can sell franchise. It's a process that takes 1 to 2 years, so patience is required. Not on the slides. There are a number of other requirements. One is fairly new. There's a mandatory earnings claim for those of you who are involved in domestic franchises, you know what that is. It's also called an FPR, financial performance representation. Basically, you have to tell franchisees in China what your units, how well your units are doing financially. So the legal compliance costs in China are probably the highest in the world, but the good news is the government is, I won't say cooperative, but not obstructive. It's not difficult. It's just time-consuming and expensive to meet the requirements. India, likewise, I'll just cover in very briefly the challenges. India is also a very challenging market for international franchising, but in a different way. It doesn't have those specific franchise laws, but it has other laws that must be addressed. The franchisor's trademark must be registered in advance, so again, there's a time period involved in doing that. Enforcement of post-termination non-competes is uncertain, so there are workarounds that have to be addressed. Repatriation of royalties is subject to government review and approval, 3 different filings, which are discretionary with the Indian government. In the past, that was a problem because there were caps placed on royalties and the like. I'm told that the Indian government currently is very pro-foreign investment, and so those have not been a problem in the last few years. So the challenges in India are administrative and political, not so much regulatory. And Sunil will talk more about that later. So there are many other issues that we address when structuring an international franchise. This slide covers some of those. I won't actually have time to address any of them in detail. I will mention in terms of financial considerations, one of the things that international franchisors have to consider is a withholding. So when royalties are paid, the government of the country in which the franchisee is located is going to withhold money to pay to cover taxes. And the withholding rates vary based on treaty. And the lowest rates generally are 10%, and China has a treaty with the U.S. where it's 10%. India is 15%. So those are not bad rates for either country. And there are ways to deal with those issues. Just have 2 other slides, basically on how to get started if you're new to international franchising. So locating franchisees is always the first question. Sometimes the inquiries come to you through the internet portals. There are trade shows. There are about 50 franchisee or franchisor associations, I should say, worldwide, and most of them have a trade show. In the U.S., the trade show that focuses on matchmaking for international prospects is called the IFE, the International Franchise Expo. It's held once a year. The U.S. government actually helps, as do many of the state governments. The U.S. embassies overseas have export assistance centers, and they will help franchisors meet prospective franchisees. The U.S. Commercial Service of the U.S. Commerce Department has a particular program to help you search for master franchisees. For example, at the IFA convention next week in Las Vegas, the U.S. Commercial Service will be there, and they will be setting up appointments to matchmake for several countries, and China is one of them. There are co-sponsored IFA and U.S. government trade missions annually. They travel to 2 or 3 countries. And another way to meet prospects is contacts with advisors. There are, of course, brokers who focus in international. There are consultants, lawyers, particularly law firms like ours with international offices, bankers, accountants, etc. And lastly, the first steps, you get a contact from a prospect. The very first thing is to have an NDA signed, a confidentiality agreement, before you start talking. And the next step we like to recommend is to register your trademark because of the lead times that I was mentioning. Once the conversation gets a little more detailed, enter into a term sheet, a memorandum of understanding, generally a non-binding commitment to further discussions. And then you begin your diligence on your candidates. And we'll have some discussion later about specific ideas for diligence, but at a minimum, you would want to do Patriot Act research, which has become much easier recently because the U.S. government has a website which will allow you to do that easily. You used to have to go to 4 or 5 different websites. We, our paralegals here at Dorsey also do that for our plans. And we'll talk about the more detailed diligence later on in the program. So with that, I'm going to ask some questions of the speakers to get the conversation started, and then we'll open it up to for further questions. So the first question that I have, and we'll start with Sunil, since he's here closest to me. Sunil, what are your recommended practices for a diligence investigation of prospective master franchisees in India?
Well, you know, I was impressed with your slide. The big thing is there really, in my experience, there really is no substitute for meeting the potential franchisee face-to-face, visiting them, him or her, in their native habitat, just so you can get a sense of who they are and what kind of business they do. I've spoken to lawyers, you know, they're lawyers, they're bankers actually. You always want to do reference checks among their customers, among their suppliers. The database, you mentioned Patriot Act. There are companies in this country at least, Kroll and Kreller, who I've used, who will do a more detailed background check, not just the Patriot Act database. There are, you know, other databases like politically exposed persons database, or the Interpol, or the FBI, because if you're going to go to bed with somebody for several years who's going to be using your trademark, you know, then you do need to do those background checks.
Okay, so thank you.
We've done a similar thing. Did you want us to do an overview at all?
Yeah, please. Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Yeah. I did jump ahead a bit.
That's okay.
So
I can
Sunil,
leave it in.
yeah, okay. No, I appreciate that. Sunil, would you give us an overview of franchising in India first?
Yeah, I mean, part of the reason why India is a subject, along with China, of this meeting is because everybody understands, you know, that India does have a tremendous market potential for franchise businesses. I saw a number from the Franchising Association of India that claims that the potential is over $50 billion by 2017. India is open to franchising. I think, you know, the opportunities are there. You can see that by looking at the many franchisors that are already there. You've got all the, you know, many of the big American names, Starbucks being one,
yeah.
But you have McDonald's, you have KFC, you have Domino's. Domino's is actually doing quite well. But then you also have some service businesses, CamDry. You have Gold's Gym. You have some Australian franchisors. You even have a South African franchisor, Nando's. So the potential is there. We all understand that, you know. But to use a euphemism for problems, the opportunities are also there. There are some problems. There are some issues to overcome in the Indian market, you know, such as it's a very diverse country with diverse cultures. You have 29 states, but unlike here, almost every state has a different language. They eat different kinds of foods. They dress differently. You know, so you have kind of these mini countries within India. So as a franchisor, you have to be aware of that. You know, not that it's good or bad, but you just have to be aware of that. Real estate, you know, Taiwan, I know, China, Japan, India is in that league when it comes to problems with finding locations, affordable and good locations, you know. The legal system, everybody talks about the slow and overburdened legal system. Is it slow? Yes. Do you have good legal remedies? Yes. Can you go to court? Yes. Can you get something done in courts? No. Because the courts are so overburdened. You know, so what is a franchisor to do? I think so it becomes important when you're negotiating agreements to try to limit the defaults that would force you to go to court. You know, lawyers, I've dealt with franchise attorneys franchisors' attorneys, who try arbitration, of course, is one option. Agree to liquidated damages on certain things, things like that. You try to narrow. So you look for overseas assets. Does your potential franchisee have overseas assets? There are state level and regional politics. India is a vibrant democracy. I mean, this morning, the party that's in power nationally took a huge beating in Delhi municipal elections. And now everybody's questioning if they're going to go forward with their reform agenda. I don't think it'll have an impact on that, but psychologically, it does make a difference. And India does have a parallel economy. There's a lot of black money.
Wenjie, same question about China. If you'd give us a quick overview.
Okay. Before I start, I have to say that unlike Gary, he's an expert in franchise. I'm not. So if you tough questions, ask him, not me. So before then, I think I will start with some highlight a few numbers and put them into context, so you will be able in a better position to evaluate how big is the market in China. I will start with the total GDP. You all know that $10 trillion in China, $17 trillion in the U.S. So by comparison, still there's a gap. But if you divide that by population, which China has more than 4 times of U.S., so the per capita income is still only about 1/8 of that in the U.S. So that gives you an idea, maybe when you contemplate in business in China, you can set your expectation more realistically. It's not a super rich country yet, but on the other hand, you shouldn't be discouraged by that, because when you are selling goods and products in China and service in China, you don't sell to every people in China. I think your primary consumer will be the middle class or upper middle class, and that number is quite encouraging. In 1920, the middle class population only accounts to 4% of the urban population, and by 2012, it amounts to 2/3 of the urban population. So that number is about 560 million people. It's bigger than the entire population in the U.S. And it is expected by 2022, the number will reach 630 million. So the middle class is growing very fast, and they are the driving force of consumption for your product and the business. And also within that middle class, there's different generations. And one generation I want to highlight is people born after mid-80s. And this generation, they are raised up in relative economic prosperity, and unlike the previous generations, they have never experienced any economic hardship, material shortage, and many of them are single child family, so they are very well off, and they travel a lot, and they are confident, independent-minded, and they are very good consumer for premium service and goods, because they want to show their personality by consumption. So and they are also willing to try new things, and they have the brand loyalty. So that would be a group of people who are increasingly playing a major role in China's consumer market. You can probably compare that to a certain extent to the baby boomer generation in the U.S. And the number now is, based on one statistic, is about 200 million people within that group. And they account, their consumption in 2012 accounts for about 15% of the total urban consumption, but it's expected that to increase to 35% in 2022. And another factor I want to highlight here is the societal change brought by massive build-up of infrastructure and transportation network in China. And one thing I want to highlight here today is the high-speed rail system in China. Starting from nothing in 2007, China has built up over 12,000 kilometers of high rail network over the past few years, and now it's running that network. And to give you an example how that means for your business is, you look there, Shanghai, Nanjing, and Hangzhou very much, that three cities is in a sort of triangle in the east part. And it used to take 4 hours to drive from Nanjing to Shanghai, and about 3 hours from Hangzhou to Shanghai, and also 4 hours from Nanjing to Hangzhou. Now, literally, somebody, a business people in Shanghai can get up and go to a Starbucks store in Shanghai, have a light breakfast, have a coffee with his employee, discuss something, early meeting, then can go to the train station and get on the train and read your email, reply all your email, answer your phones, and after about an hour, you are in Nanjing. So you can go to your meeting in Nanjing, then you can go to Pizza Hut to have spaghetti or whatever with your business associate. Then you can hop to the train again and go to Hangzhou, and for another meeting in the afternoon. That's about an hour train ride. And then you can still, if you still don't want to go home, you can still go to Outback restaurant, have a steak dinner with somebody in Hangzhou, then go back to Shanghai at night. So you can see, like, because in China, all these huge metropolitan areas, very crowded with people, and already quite crowded, very close, and the railway system has even brought them even closer. And I think for franchising business, at least that means more opportunities for you to set up more outlets, and also it makes it easier because now the high-speed railway not only in the eastern part of the country, also moving west, and also make it easier for you to franchise in the second, third, and even fourth tier cities. So the opportunity will be huge. I think that's something you probably can compare to how the railway has has changed the economic landscape in the U.S. in the 19th century. So have that in mind when you're planning your business in China. And then talking about challenge, definitely, like Gary has mentioned that, Sunil has mentioned that, there's challenges in China. First of all, is the cultural challenge, and different culture, you have to recognize difference, and also local different customs and habits. And that's how, if once you recognize those difference and acknowledge difference, then you are able to probably adapt your product and service locally. I think one amazing example would be Starbucks, because Starbucks is so successful in China, in a country with primarily a tea drinking society. So you can see like it's a challenge, but it's not something insurmountable. And also another challenge now probably is people, like find the right quality people as management employees. I said that generation born after mid-80s, they call it Generation 2. They are very good consumers, but may not be good employees. So and the training cost could be very high, and also the turnover rate is very high, because now they are one child, they never experience any hardship, they don't like hardworking. So unlike our generation, we tend to be very hardworking people, but that would be a challenge for a lot of people. And real estate cost definitely is a huge problem. It's very high, and IP protection is another issue. And Gary has mentioned that once you start your business and maybe in the early stage, you have to register your trademark and do every thing possible to protect your IP. Don't wait for the government to enforce or something. But I think it's everything is in your own hand. There's a lot of things you can do to protect your IP. But the issue has been progress in China, but it's a huge country, and probably, I don't know, Starbucks has any experience in that. If you go to a remote place, probably see some sign there similar to yours, but when you really look at it, it's different. So it happened everywhere in China. So and also Sunil mentioned the diversity. China is a diverse society as well. So that means you probably want to start your business in different regions. I talked to Michael that Starbucks has different arrangement in North China, in Beijing area, in Shanghai area, and also in Guangzhou area. So that's something you want to bear in mind as well.
Mike, do you want to give an overview of Starbucks?
Sure, I'll try to say. Can they hear? Okay. I have a loud voice too. So first, although we're large, we're probably 60 plus countries now. We did start small, and because I know not all the companies that you all represent or work for are big, but when we first went to Japan almost 19 years ago, the company was about $600 million a year, but we had big aspirations. And actually the point that you're making in China, and I'll come back to what we do, but China is a IP pirating place still to a degree. We probably have at any given time a couple hundred lawsuits going, shutting down various people that are opening up either fake Starbucks, fake products, et cetera. But what we've done, we've used a variety of the different methods that Gary talked about internationally. We have some company-owned markets, about 10. We have several in Europe, France and the UK are a couple. We have what I'll call pure licensed markets, where we license the entire market or franchise to one master company. And then we had a number of joint ventures where we've partnered, usually with one. It hasn't always been that way, but typically it's one partner in a market, and we've invested anywhere from 18 to 50%. There's a number of considerations that you take into account on which markets do you want to do that. I think we're going to get into that later. But we've used a variety of those methods over time to enter into the different markets. Specifically in China, we did start off going in the north with a joint venture with a partner. That was before people knew whether coffee would work. It was before we really had proved to ourselves, how we could operate internationally. China, it was just beginning, just opening up. So we parceled off just one part of the country. Partly you can see on this map, it's a massive country. I mean, it's the size of the U.S., right? And there's loads of regional differences. India, similarly, and we didn't really feel like we wanted to go in and give one party the whole country, although typically that's what we've done in most of the other countries around the world. So we started in the north in Beijing. We ended up going in around Shanghai and a couple of the provinces, which is the wealthiest part of both Beijing and China, Shanghai, with a company out of Taiwan that we had been doing business with, and we went into a 50-50 joint venture with them. And then we went in with a Hong Kong partner of ours in a joint venture that we controlled sort of in the south. And then there was another vast area that was sort of left open. Really the only place in the world that we had approached development-wise that way. Business for us was good in China, and as time went on, we decided we wanted to actually operate it ourselves, and we thought we had started to get the expertise that we could do that. So we bought back the Beijing business from our partner. We later bought back the south part of China. In the meantime, we developed the rest of China, and currently we own and operate almost all of China except for that 3-province region around Shanghai, which is still a 50-50 joint venture. It's actually a challenge to have multiple parties like that because we're trying to run national programs, and although you can contractually require things, the practical day-to-day of getting stuff done, you're not usually pulling out your legal agreement very often, is more challenging. So China, that's how we've developed in China. India is a 50-50 partnership, joint venture with Tata Beverage, which is one of India's largest and most respected companies. You know, in all of these BRIC countries, being an American company, FCPA considerations are huge, particularly if you're taking equity. That's one of Foreign Corrupt Practice, anti-bribery, and you know, places like Russia, Brazil, China, India. There's a lot of corruption, and taking ownership brings additional risk to companies. Who you're going into business with plays, you know, another big role. So one of Tata's about as squeaky clean company with about the best reputation in India. So that was one important consideration as well for us. And to get back to Gary's earlier question about diligence and things, what we do with that typically is we will use a company like Kroll or others who can do, in most of these countries, research on what kind of litigation background and other things that the company and the main individuals have been involved in. We'll do deep financial analysis, and again, we're typically not always sometimes it's a public company, often it's family-held companies, but they're usually of a reasonable size given the nature of our business. So it's both a little bit easier, but it's also incredibly important that we get it right. So we invest a fair amount of time vetting people that way. We see their operations. You know, we want them to have had other retail and or food and beverage operations, and we actually have people go and visit, see how do they operate those, what's their reputation, talk to some of the people involved. We have a strong cultural piece in our brand. I mean, the brand is really about, it's almost more about the people than it is about the coffee. So making sure that we get people and companies with the right values that are going to do the things the way that we want them to do it is critically important to the success and the way our brand will show up in those markets. And then we have them come here and meet with executives too. So we end up with a pretty involved diligence process with our potential partners or licensees.
Archie, did you have any comments about the diligence with respect to China specifically?
I think nothing particular. I think probably like Michael has mentioned that, Sunil has mentioned that, cross-reference, probably that's something you want to do. Like talk to your lawyer, talk to your accountant, and check with all the people you know in China. So because it's always difficult to get a full picture of somebody unless you do cross-reference.
Is the process fairly transparent in China?
I think it's getting there. Now you can go to SAIC, get all the company information, and with the increased using of the computing system, advanced computing system, now you can actually getting a lot of more information than before.
But it more than before, but it's, compared to here, it's still challenging in China.
Well, you know, databases exist. It's just in what form they're in. How do you get access to those? You know, so yeah, you're right. And compared to U.S. transparency, it's not as transparent even in
particularly.
So, Michael, you talked a little bit about issues to consider in deciding whether to have company-owned joint venture and the like. I think I'll turn to Sunil and Guanji. For Sunil, do you usually do master franchise, sub-franchise, area development? What in India is the typical?
Well, typically Indian franchisees want a master franchise relationship. That's where the negotiation usually starts, where they agree to open one or two showcase outlets, and then they want the right to sub-franchise. From a franchisor perspective, U.S. or foreign franchisor, does that make sense? And I think that's a decision the franchisor has to make based on who they're dealing with, what their background is, what their successes are, what their values are, like Mike said. My recommendation has been, yes, Mr. Franchisee or Miss Potential Franchisee, we can talk about that, but maybe we need to look at initially an area development relationship. Show me that you can do this, and then, yes, we'll talk about a master franchise. I think from a franchisor perspective, because unless you're talking about companies like Starbucks and McDonald's, you're generally not talking about joint ventures or company-owned operations. You're generally talking about some kind of a franchise relationship. So in the Indian context, it's always multi-unit, but it just depends on the franchisor as to what they're comfortable with the franchisee being able to do. But like I said, my recommendation is let them show you first before you, And the other thing is in India, you have to consider regional, potentially regional franchises, because it is a huge country. And like I said earlier, it's kind of mini countries, many mini countries. So you should consider regional.
I would agree even in China as well. And Brazil, some of these countries are so massive, and if you look at the infrastructure and who all the players are, unless you have a very large, sophisticated party that's got national...
Like a Tata.
Like the Tata.
Yeah.
It's challenging whether they're actually going to be able to pull it off, and it gives you more, control down the road if somebody's not working out to swap people. So I'd agree with you.
Guanji, anything specific about China?
I think Michael has mentioned that you need to do regional and to whether you do direct franchising with this company, joint venture and the company owned. I think probably if you have the ability, joint venture and company owned, to start with that, I think you have a better chance of success in China to persuade potential franchisees. But that's not something every franchisor can do. If you're a small entity, that will mean a lot of financial burden for you to start with. But when you look at all these successful stories in China, big names like McDonald's, KFC, Starbucks, Pizza Hut, even now going to the service industry like Century 21, and all of them started with company-owned or joint venture.
Michael, how about supply considerations? Obviously, the product with Starbucks is key. Do you source that locally? Do you bring it in internationally? What are some of the considerations?
So the coffee is generally, to date, has been produced out of a handful of plants in the U.S. and in Amsterdam, but it's become an issue in a number of these markets, particularly India. Brazil is another country where the tariffs for bringing in roasted coffee as opposed to roasting it locally can be prohibitive. It can be 50, 75, 100% tariff. So while we started off that way, we've started to look more and more at local roasting, and we're doing local roasting in India largely because of the tariffs. We've started looking at a little bit in China as well. But all of these issues around whatever it is that the franchisor, licensor like us has to supply, you have to look at how hard is it going to be to get some of these products in. What are the trade relationships under the trade treaties? What are the tariffs going to be? what's the practical, some countries like Brazil, Argentina, your stuff will sit in port for weeks, even though it's not, supposed to. So you have to understand the practical nature of it and how critical are these products, or which products can actually be purchased by the franchisee locally, or how do you adapt, and how we've had to adapt our supply chain in a number of countries to source much more locally products beyond just the obvious stuff like some of the fresh foods to deal with those sorts of issues. So it's a big consideration, and I'd say particularly in India too, with cold chain, infrastructure. India's way behind China on sort of the infrastructure piece.
Also
China
behind
has
Brazil.
these
Also behind Brazil.
and behind
Yeah.
Brazil. So things you take for granted that you think about here, like how can you get that product that needs to be refrigerated from place A to B, is a challenge in India, not so much in China. So those are some other considerations, I think.
No, I agree.
I know you work with some restaurant chains that are doing business in India. What are some of the supply chains?
Well, I agree with Michael regarding the cold chain, regarding the infrastructure. So you really have to plan. I mean, it's not something that's totally unsurmountable that'll cause you to not look at India as a market, because we know there are successful restaurant chains there. But probably more localization, probably more local sourcing. I mean and it's that, and it's also kind of the modifying, kind of adjusting to the local taste. So if you're a restaurant, a huge percentage of Indians are vegetarians, or they're egg vegetarians. They're vegetarians, then they're vegetarians who'll eat egg, but otherwise they're, and there's the chickentarians or something like that, So those issues exist. They're not insurmountable, but they are significant that will need to be addressed, especially in markets in India.
One, just tag on to that too, and it was something I learned and we learned, which is on the food and what are local tastes. I think often American companies will assume that they want the local thing, and how do you localize all of your food? And there's certainly examples of companies that have done that. What we found, and I know from talking to other people and other companies, is often what they want is the original real thing. They want and certainly true in India, they want for us, a blueberry muffin, or they want their own thing. You may localize the taste. So in Asia, typically you're going to make it a little bit less sweet. You may do portion size for pricing, like in India. You may add some local flavors to the form, but I think a lot of companies will make the mistake that everything should be local, and you often can't compete with the local because they'll probably do it better and cheaper, and that's actually not what the people want.
If I want a local item, why would I go to an American company to get a local item? Why would I not go to the stand at the end of my street that's been selling that food item for generations to my family for generations? And I've come across that when I've opened Ponderosa steakhouses in Taiwan, for example. I was advised, well, we're Chinese people, we don't eat raw vegetables. You're trying to sell us a salad bar. We don't eat hunks of beef, you're trying to sell us steaks. So it's a big issue. Should we change, should we not? I agree with you. Yes, you do need to localize some taste and sizes, but really people, they're coming to an American chain because they want American food.
So financial considerations, close to the heart of most franchisors. It's complicated. There are a lot of issues of repatriation funds, there's withholding tax, currency risk, etc. So, Guanxi, what are some of the financial considerations in China for U.S. franchise?
I think for franchising, like if either you do it at a joint venture or company owned, or it's just direct franchising, the issue is the same because China has relaxed the foreign exchange control on the current account since 7-8 years ago. So even maybe earlier than that. So for franchisees to convert local currency into U.S. dollar or other hard currencies to pay for the royalty, that's not a problem as long as you have filed all this agreement to start with. And for joint ventures and the company owned, the dividends you can repatriate easily. You have mentioned that earlier the withholding tax subject to withholding tax. And the currency risk, I think for the past 10 years, that's not an issue because the renminbi has been appreciating against U.S. dollar, but I don't know what's going to happen in the next 10 years. So that may be something for a company to consider whether they need to hedge for the exchange risk or not.
Sunil, how about India? The exchange risk
Yeah.
been talked about a lot.
Yeah, well, India has relaxed a lot of regulations. India used to be very highly regulated. In the last 10 years, the 5% you mentioned has gone away. Okay. You don't need government approvals. You may need approval from the central bank, which is the Reserve Bank of India, to transfer money out of India, but it's not as complicated or as involved as it used to be. So as a franchisor, can I get royalties? Yes, you can get royalties. Will there be withholding? Yes, there will be in India like anywhere else. Currency risk in terms of, there'll be the standard currency ups and downs between the U.S. dollar and the Indian rupee, the normal adjustment. Do I see a huge risk that Indian rupee will somehow fall through the floor? No. India, it has a very solid economy now, a lot more transparency than there used to be. Is it where it should be? Probably not, but it is getting there. So I really don't see any unusual, risks in terms of taking money out or, currency risks or whatever.
Mike, about Starbucks, what financial considerations do you normally consider?
Well, all of the above. But we haven't had a problem in India or China, as far as currency or bringing money in or out. We've had it in South America. We've had it in Argentina, where banks froze. Central bank froze currency exchange, and there's other restrictions we deal with, like in Brazil has restrictions on deductibility of royalties, so there's limits on what you can charge. But we've managed it, and although we have a pretty sophisticated treasury department, banking relationships, so it has not been a problem.
Are you in Venezuela?
No.
Okay. Okay.
No.
There you wouldn't be able to take any dollars out.
Correct. No. We've stayed away from Venezuela for now.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you. We'll take questions from the audience, both the webinar audience and here. I do have one question from Moni Singh having to do with the trademark being registered in China. So yes, the trademark has to be registered in China before you can actually open up your first franchise. And that's true in India as well, and a number of other countries. Not so much true in North America, of course. So you have to register early. China and India are both members of the various international trademark conventions. The systems are modern. They're responsive. We've not had any problems registering our clients' trademarks in either country, but it's a process that takes time, and what we normally recommend is starting with a composite design mark, which is just the easiest mark to register. It's typically doesn't have the conflicts with other marks that a word mark might. So all you have to do is register one mark in your one class and in your two class, and we can do that typically in a year, but sometimes it takes up to 2 years. But that is important. Have another question from Alan Branch webinar, and we'll start taking questions here. So Alan's question is, for Starbucks, Discussions and negotiations took over 4 years. Please explain the timeframes for completing deals in various countries.
I'm sorry, he said
That's
it
what
took
he said.
4 years?
He says discussions and negotiations. He's from Australia. He may be talking about that. Discussions and negotiations took over 4 years. Please explain timeframes. Oh, he said for India.
For India. It's a long, complicated question. We had India's laws have changed a little bit as far as investment and control for retailers and multi-branded retailers. At the time we were going in, there was still a lot of uncertainty, and we had looked at India, and then we decided to pause. Another consideration was coffee was still pretty early in India, so there was a lot of speculation about us entering. Then we stopped for a long period, and then we decided, we re-looked at the market and went back in.
What the laws Mike is talking about, if I could just jump in here, was the restriction on foreign direct investment in multi-brand retail. Okay, and like you said, it
like
has
Target
since changed.
Or,
yeah.
Or
I mean, you can have a Nike because it's one brand, and now Nike can invest 100% if they want to in their retail, but you can't have a Target, you can't have a Walmart. That's been liberalized. It's now 51%, but there is some requirement. I'm not sure exactly what that is. That if you're bringing money in as foreign investment directly into multi-brand retail, you have to devote some of that to building the supply infrastructure. But will it ever be 100%? We don't know when it'll be. We'll find out. The budget session is at the end of this month.
So India's open for business for franchising, but not necessarily for all types of business.
And not for multi-brand retail. Why? Because, it's a democracy. You have retailers who want control of the corner sites, so to say, before the foreigners are let in. So
Sunil, from beginning to today, I decide I want to go to India and attend the next Mumbai franchise show. Reasonably speaking, how long? Just wild ask guess, how much money would you expect?
You mean from the time?
Today I want to go.
Yeah. And you mean till the time you open the first location?
No. Be able to do this. Be able to attend a franchise show.
In India?
Yes.
You can do that now.
And sell a franchise?
You could sell a franchise, yes. You could start negotiating while you're doing your trademark registrations.
I want all that done first, and then go to the show.
My experience, whether it's India or Egypt or Dubai or, doing agreements, typically you have to plan around 2 years from the time, because the agreement negotiations take a long time, by the time you find, so.
And my next question, if I was to go to the Mumbai franchise show with a group of my peers, fellow Americans, what communication issues would I be challenged to attend a franchise show?
You're talking about language?
Yes.
No, the kind of people, the level of people you will be dealing with, potential franchisees, I don't think you'll have an issue with language. I don't think you will have an issue with them understanding the laws that you're talking about. Because remember, we were both British colonies, the U.S. and India, so the Brits have left something there. No, I don't. If you want to go tomorrow to go attend a trade show in Bombay, you can do that.
But then, last question, I sold my first franchise. We encountered this in other countries. Just to do Main Street business, get a phone, get your electrical service, what type of graft and corruption they have to maneuver through? As we experienced in Mexico, we sold 4 franchises in Monterey, and then, oh crap, we found out we had to go get a phone, and it took 9 months. But if I paid the right senor, I could have a phone tomorrow.
10 years ago, I probably would have said, I agree with you. Things are changing in India. Could it be that in a given state, in a given city, you have to, your guy has to, you're certainly not going to pay bribes. because of Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. But if you're a franchisee, is he having to grease some palms? I don't know.
You don't know?
Could be.
You don't know?
Could be.
Really?
But,
Did
yeah.
you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, just a couple quick points. First, to pick up on that, and that Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, it's huge. In mid-December, the Justice Department hit Avon, $8 million of gifts, et cetera. The penalty was $135 million. So the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act has become huge. The second thing, which I think is very important for everybody here, is the Trans-Pacific Partnership. This is ongoing in Congress right now. It is going to happen this year. This will be the first free trade agreement with Japan. It's opening up huge markets, and there'll be huge imports coming in, huge exports going out. This is going to change the market overnight. So you should keep that in mind.
Yeah, Doug.
It's more than Japan. There are 9 countries involved in those negotiations. And now that the Republicans are in control, this might be one example of cooperation. I want to thank Dorsey for this session because it's very interesting, the challenges of entering foreign markets. But I haven't heard much about financing. And there is a federal agency, OPIC, the Overseas Private Investment Corporation.
Thank you for mentioning that.
Which was established to provide loan guarantees, political risk insurance, make it possible to gain access to financing that otherwise may be difficult. I just didn't know if there was enough familiarity with it.
Right, they're very active in franchising, helping finance international franchising, export of U.S. companies, outbound franchising. Thank you for mentioning. We might have time for one more question. Yes.
Pricing strategies, given the difference in average incomes, say India or China versus here, how do your pricing strategies differ even though you're trying to sell the same products? Might be for Mike, yeah, I think so.
Well, first, each market, we do a separate analysis for every given market. If you were to compare what are the prices, say, in Shanghai to say New York, generally they're probably pretty similar. Now you have different income levels, but if you actually translated it, they're roughly pretty similar. But we have to look at everything from what's the real estate cost and what's the local labor cost, what are your supply costs. We don't have uniform pricing, but generally we're somewhat similar. Although you can see in the Wall Street, I think the Wall Street Journal does like a latte.
Big Mac index?
It's like the Big Mac, but it's a latte index, and it shows that Starbucks cost of a latte in different cities around the world.
The Big Mac index kind of is surprisingly inexpensive. Must be fairly efficient. Yeah. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for the speakers and for the participants on the webinar and first one. Thanks for attending.